looking at Mark 10, verses 13 to 16, entitled Children and Faith. We're going to have a little shorter session, I think, today, although last time I thought that I was working with a guy on a recording, and he said, well, this is only going to take me about 5 minutes and we can get on with something else. That 5-minute session lasted an hour and 35 minutes. Well, I'm hoping that same isn't true today. Well, in this particular session, beginning in verse 13, Mark abruptly changes the topic of focus. That's untypical for him because there's no transformation. What's the term? There's no change, no indication that we're going to change subjects. He just changes it. Jesus moved on from the teaching on divorce, which was provoked by the Pharisees, of course. He goes on to a shorter teaching concerning children, their nature, and your entrance into the kingdom of God. Well, again, there's no real transition, word I was looking for a minute ago. No transition to the kids. It's just placed here somewhat interestingly, though. Even though Mark doesn't say we're going to change focus, he just changes it. But there is an interesting connection, perhaps. Adjacent to, it's placed, this session about kids is placed adjacent to and following a teaching on marriage. We call it a divorce, but it is, of course, on marriage. So, did he place this as a sequel to the marriage? I don't know. Some people get a big kick out of making such speculations. He put it here, so we'll deal with it here. Verse 13 of Mark 10. And they, with no specific indication of who they were, but it was probably what? Fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles. They were bringing children to him, Jesus, so that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked him for it. So people are bringing children to Jesus to have him touch him. Some say lay on the hands. And the disciple says, no, get him out of here. Get him out of here. Even so, apparently, even the Gentiles in Perea, because that's we assume where Jesus was, evidently had some notion of Jesus' power and want some of it sent in the direction of their children. In that culture, in that day, people brought young children. Generally, they're under the age of 12. Luke, for example, in 18:15 to 17, uses a Greek word that would translate it not children, but babies. And they would bring their babies and their young children to great rabbis, hoping that the rabbi would bless the child, and the way of doing that generally included laying on of the hands. If you are interested in why the difference between children and babies, you can study the difference of the Greek word paida, P-A-I-D-A, and brephe, B-R-E-P-H-E. Paida was by Mark and Matthew. Brephe was by Luke. Again, The touching or the laying on of hands, as indicated in Mark 19:13 to 15, Matthew all calls it not touching, but laying on the hands, was typically part of such a ceremony. Why? Because it visibly conveyed that the rabbi was asking God's blessing on the child. If you go to Genesis 48, verses 13 through 30, you get an exchange between Jacob and his son Joseph, involving Jacob's blessings of the two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And in those, Jacob lays hands on each, and that was an issue because Jacob laid his hand first on the younger child, Ephraim, when Joseph wanted him to do the older child, Manasseh, who was naturally the firstborn. So he wanted him blessed first. Didn't happen. Jacob had his own reasons. Later, we're going to see that Jesus did lay hands on the children, but he went even farther. And we'll talk about that when we get to the last verse, I think it is, of our session. But before we move on, let me ask you this. Who were they who brought the children? Well, I've really already answered that. It evidently would have been the kids' fathers, mothers, siblings, older siblings, adult relatives. We don't really know, but it was people in general. But the 12, Jesus' inner group of 12, evidently thought these young ones were an intrusion for something of no or little value. Jesus evidently, however, thought otherwise. So let's look at verse 14. But when Jesus saw what the 12 were doing, he was indignant. Now that means he had a powerful emotional response when he saw that, may even have included anger. And he said to the 12, "Permit the children to come to me. Do not hinder them." And that could easily be translated, stop hindering them. Why? For the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Now, people make some extrapolations from this. The kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Some take to be a guarantee that a child who dies in this state will automatically go to heaven. Now, most of us believe that, but I'm not sure. I think that's stretching this verse a bit to make that point. Maybe you have it. I can't say it doesn't include that. Only Mark mentions Jesus' strong emotional response, possibly, as I said, including anger, and it's all wrapped up in that one word, indignant. But know the double command also. He says what? Permit them to come, stop hindering them. So you do one thing. Quit doing what you're doing, let them come. Jesus, I think, wanted everyone to know how he loved and had compassion for even Gentile children, while the behavior of the 12 appears to indicate they felt the kids were unimportant and of too little value to their group to give them time. I mean, so a kid follows you. What does that? Adult follows you? That has meaning. Kid following you? Yeah, it probably does. You see all kinds of things were possibly in the minds of the 12. So Jesus said, stop hindering him. Stop, knock off what you're doing. There's another way to look at the appropriateness of Jesus' emotional response. Because remember, he said what? For theirs the kingdom of God belongs to such as thee. How can he make that claim? Well, remember, Jesus is the king of God's kingdom. Kings have rights. Jesus has rights. He will determine who goes into the kingdom and who does not. But what did he mean by the kingdom's belonging to those like these kids? What did they possess or do that was on his approval list? Interesting question, but the answer is pretty dull. Nothing. They haven't done anything that would be considered a righteous work, and they have no different value than anyone. They cannot merit heaven. They cannot merit entrance into the kingdom. No works, no righteousness, except now they do have a receptivity to accept Christ and dependence on him. Because that's the nature of young kids, babies in particular. They receive whoever comes generally, whatever comes, and they're dependent upon others for everything. And that's exactly how anyone has to look and behave to come to Jesus. Acceptance of him, what he has done, and total dependence on the work of God with zero dependence on anything in you, of you, or from you. The kingdom is, of course, a gift of God, a gift to be accepted, not merited, not earned. Then Jesus makes an emphasized, he doesn't make a new law. He's going to emphasize the truth of the verse 4 that we just read. And I'll read it, 14, I'm sorry. Permit the children to come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Now let's look at verse 15 rather. 5 following 4, my error, but 15 following 14, correct. Truly I say to you, this is Jesus talking, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child, meaning receive independence on Jesus for receipt of the kingdom. Whoever does not receive the kingdom of God in that way, like a child would, shall not enter it at all. Unless you accept the finished work of Christ and depend upon his work entirely, you ain't going into the kingdom. This factor is well documented. Look at Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The spirit, someone who knows they have no merit or value themselves, to gain the kingdom of heaven. But those are precisely the people who are likely to make it. And how do we know that? Because Jesus makes the choice. Matthew 11:25. At that time, Jesus answered and said, I praise thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou didst hide these things from the wise and the intelligent, and didst reveal them to babes. And 3 verses later in 11:28 of Matthew, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Another thing that we don't see is that Jesus said, you come to me under the right conditions, I will decide that you are in, and I will give you the rest. In John 6:37, Jesus says, all that the Father gives me shall come to me, and the one who comes to me I will certainly not cast out. So, if you want into heaven, then you need to come to Jesus for his saving power, not your own, admitting that you are incapable of earning entrance into the kingdom. And the need for this trust, well, just check out Romans 3:9-18. And again, we're going to see something a bit. A quote from Psalm 14:3 and 53:1-3. If you go and look at those verses, you will see what's coming up. And get a glance of why God did things this way by checking 1 Corinthians 26-29. I will read those for you. For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh. You weren't picked because you were smart. Not many mighty. You weren't particularly powerful. Not many noble. Your birth is probably not anything of significance, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He's done this for a purpose. You were picked for a purpose. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world and the despised. God has chosen the things that are not, that he might nullify the things that are, that no man should boast before God. So there are a lot of cultural reasons why God might have chosen you, not because of anything great, plentiful, notoriety, and nothing like that. As a matter of fact, he did it not only that the culture would be shocked, but that you could not boast. I'm in the kingdom of God. Look what I did. No, you did it. God chose the weak, the insignificant, the unimportant to enter the kingdom, and chose them for his own purposes. Which puts me in mind of an earlier session from Mark, back in chapter 4, verses 26-29. The kingdom grows only through God's work and, in this case, God's choices. Finally, in this section, Jesus went beyond touch, and he laid hands on the kids. But notice what he did first. He took them into his arms. He grabbed around them, he hugs them, he lifts them up, and he began blessing them, laying his hands upon them. So when a warm-hearted, fervent show of love and acceptance, Jesus took the children in his arms and laid his hands on them, affirming the blessing that he, as God, was giving. Now, people didn't all know the extent of the blessings Jesus was giving their kids. Those taken into the kingdom are those who have a need to get in, they're out, and cannot earn entrance into the kingdom themselves. So, two conditions. You got to be on the outside, which we all are to begin with, and you can't get your own efforts to earn entrance. You have to be dependent on Jesus for that. Next up, the interruption by a rich young man with a question and a problem. We'll see you next.